Okay, I'm Terry, and today, I'm going to be making one of my grandmother's recipes. She and my mother both made this recipe. My mother had it written in pencil on the inside of one of her cookbooks because she'd gotten a recipe from my grandmother. I don't know where my grandmother got the recipe, or if it's an old family recipe, or if it's one that she read in the newspaper, or that her mother developed, because her mother was supposed to be an outstanding cook. But you start by separating 5 eggs. So I like to separate my eggs in a separate bowl since there's so many of them, because then if I break a yolk, I don't have to do all 5 again. So I usually don't have enough eggs on hand to do that twice. Come on, there we go. And if you don't have a plan for the egg yolks, you can just throw them away. Although there are some other recipes that you can do that call for egg yolks. So now that one's good, so I'm going to dump it in the bowl. Separate the next one. That circle didn't. Okay. Oop, that one started to break. I got it out just in time before it got yolk in there. So that's 2. Needs to go that way. That's 3. I'm dumping these shells in my garbage can below the sink. Here's number 4. Okay. Ooh, that one broke too when I got it in there, so glad I didn't get the yolk in that one either. And here's number 5. And I have let these eggs sit overnight so that they would get room temperature. You can get them out early in the day, but I think a room temperature egg does a better job than a cold egg. So, all right, so those are my eggs are separated. And I am going to set these in the refrigerator in case I decide to use them for pie or something. My grandmother used to make a custard pie that took 3 egg yolks. And this can go in the sink because it's ready to be washed. I'm not going to use that again. All right, so my egg whites are separated. And I'm done with this. I can get that out of the way. All right, let me wipe that egg white off my hands that got on it. All right, so now we need, well, now I got egg white on my wax paper, so I'm going to get a fresh piece of wax paper because I'm going to sift my flour on the wax paper. And obviously, I don't want it to stick to the wax paper. Excuse me, I know this is probably blocking your view, but I need to get this, and I should have gotten this out before I started. And my box of cake flour out. Okay, so this recipe calls for 3 cups of sifted cake flour. So I sift the flour first. So let me dip out. And this I don't really measure at this point, but I'm going to measure very precisely. I think that'll probably be 3 cups. I'm going to measure very precisely when it comes to the cake, but I sift the cake flour first before I actually measure it. I just kind of roughly measure so that I know I have 3 cups. And you see I bought another box because I didn't think I had 3 cups in there. All right, so now once that's sifted, I take my mixing bowl off of my mixer and I put my sifter in it because it's going to be sifted again a second time. And that's what makes this cake super light, is you double sift the flour. So now I have a straight edge, a knife, to make sure that when I'm going to just dip this flour in. I am not going to pack it or shake it down because I want it to keep all the air that's in the flour. And I'm going to slide my knife across so I have a nice level thing. I'm going to use 3 cups of flour. There's 2. Okay, and there's 3. So that's perfect amount of flour. Now I'm not going to start sifting that yet. I'm going to take the rest of this flour and I'm going to dump it back into my flour container, and I will use some more of this in the cake pans. But not that much. And I'm going to recycle this wax paper because I'm going to take my cake pans and I'm going to go ahead and get them ready right now. Okay, where's my shortening? Where is my shortening? Oh, there it is. Okay. All right. So to get the cake pans ready, I am going to put some shortening in. I take a paper towel and wipe it around on the bottom and the sides. Like that. Take a little bit more, wipe it around on the second one. I throw that paper towel in the trash. I'm done with that. And I'm gonna need the shortening again in a second because we put some shortening in the cake. So now I take my kitchen shears and I measure my cake pan and I go, okay, it's this wide. So I'm gonna cut a square. All right, so this end looks a little straighter, so I use this side. So that'll be from there. If you follow the diagonal, you get a square, so you cut perpendicular across. And I put this down in the bottom, and I smooth it out so it sticks into the thing, and that picks up, and I pick it up and flip it over. That gets a little bit of shortening on it. And put it back down. This way the cake is going to come out. That's going to help the cake come out of the pan. And we repeat that process with this one. So we measure with the pan on that. Cut. These are, I think, 8x8 cake pans. We always do caramel cake in square cake pans at our house. And I know some people like them in the round cake pans. But for some reason, we've always done them in the square cake pans. I've never tried it in the round ones. I'm sure it would be fine, though, if you have round cake pans. All right. So we turn that over. We put it like that. Now, since we're videoing, I'm going to go ahead and put the flour in here so I can get this off the counter. So I put just a little bit of flour in there, and I'm going to shake it around. So that the sides and the bottom are coated. I'll shake the extra into that. It's not quite enough in there. Let me put a little bit more. And we shake this around on the bottom and then down each of the sides. Back in there. Close that up. Get that off of the counter so we have more space. All right. So, now we have our cake pans ready, and I'm going to set them to the side, out of the way. We'll get rid of the wax paper. Get rid of the kitchen shears. And we need the sugar. I got my sugar too far back. Let me get a knife to scooch it to the front where I can reach. All right. So now this recipe calls for 3 teaspoons of baking powder. All right, so I like to put that in next. Find my measuring teaspoon. Here we go. 1. And I put this right in my sifter with my flour. And it calls for 1/8 of a teaspoon of salt, which I don't normally measure. I usually just put that in my hand till it looks like about 1/8 of a teaspoon and dump it in. If you want to measure that, you can. All right, but I've been making this cake a long time. I don't really have to measure that anymore. So it calls for 2 cups of sugar, but you don't put all 2 cups in right now. So I put 1 cup in the sifter, and usually that fills my sifter all the way to the brim. Yeah, so I don't know whether you can see that good, but that's all the way to the brim. And I'm going to go ahead and measure out my next 1 cup. Okay, so you see how I'm straightening it off so I get exactly 1 cup. I'm measuring everything pretty precisely because this is a cake recipe and cakes. And so I sift down just a little bit, and then I pour half of this. And I don't really measure this. I just kind of estimate half, and I'll look at it and go, a little more. Okay, that seems about right to me. Okay, that's good. So now I'm going to finish sifting all of this together. And that kind of helps blend the sugar, flour, baking powder, and salt, and gets it distributed pretty good by sifting it all together like that. Okay, so we get the sifter out of the way. We're done with the sugar for right now. We'll need it again when we do the icing. All right, so next thing I put in is it calls for 2/3 cup of shortening. And I use the water displacement measure, and I'm gonna have to go off camera to get water. So I will be right back. I'm sorry for the dead air and no action. So I put 1/3 cup of water in my measuring cup. And then I take my shortening and I dip out my shortening and I try and push it all down below the water. And when the water level reaches 1 cup, I know I have enough shortening. So that was almost the right amount. That was almost a little more than 3/4 cup. So let's put little pieces of shortening in until we get it to rise up to the 1 cup line. As long as all the shortening is below the water level, not quite, then you know you have it right. And that looks like it's perfect. Okay, so I take it over to the sink and drain the water out. And I put this in there. All right, and let's go ahead and put this little bit in there with it. So I think some stuck in the cup, so that'll be perfect. Let me get my towel and wipe my hand off. Got shortening on my finger. Okay, so now the shortening goes back in the cabinet. Let me get this out of the way too, excuse me, blocking your view for a moment. All right, so now we need 1 cup of whole milk. I always use whole milk. I have done the cake with 2%, and I've done the cake with, I don't think I've ever done it with 1% or skim. But cakes typically, to taste really good, need the whole milk. You do not want to make a cake with skim milk. It needs the fat to rise right. Oh, I forgot to turn the oven on. While I'm off camera, let me turn the oven on. I bake this cake, lower oven, bake 315. All right, so my oven is heating up. And I'm going to measure 1 cup, get this turned around where I can see the measurement line. 1 cup of milk. Okay. And I use whole milk for this because I want it to have the fat. And if you're eating a piece of cake, you're not eating diet food. Don't make it diet. All right. And it also needs 1 teaspoon of vanilla. So we've got our measuring teaspoon here, and we're going to add 1 teaspoon of vanilla. And I usually go ahead and put that in the milk, so all my fluids go in at the same time. All right, so I'm going to put this back into the mixer. And our recipe says that we need to mix this for 2 minutes on high. But what I like to do is to do it on low for about 10 or 15 seconds to get all the flour moistened like that. And now I'm going to come over to my kitchen timer and set 2 minutes. And when I push start, I'm going to let this do its job for 2 minutes. And while it's beating for 2 minutes, I am going to beat the egg whites with the other half a cup of sugar separately. I have them now. Before I had a stand mixer, when I made the cake, I would always beat my egg whites first, set them aside, then use my beaters to do this, because that way your beaters are nice and clean to do your egg whites. You want real clean beaters. I like to also beat egg whites in a glass bowl. I don't know why I want to use a glass bowl, but I think my mother and grandmother used either glass or ceramic bowls for the egg whites. But anyway, so now I've got this set. I'm going to start this on high. Start this. Okay, timer is running. We have 45 seconds left on the timer. I'll put my beater to the sink. I'm going to pause this just a second so I can wipe the sides real fast. Tried to do it one time without stopping the mixer and I about lost my hand, so I learned to stop it. I'm just letting it run a few seconds beyond the timer since I paused it. Okay, so now we have this part ready. And what we need to do is we need to incorporate our egg whites and sugar. Now the recipe says put them in and beat it at high for 1 minute. But in home ec, they always told us that if you beat on high after you add them, you're going to take all the air that you just spent all that time putting in. So what I do, just slightly different than what Gian and Mom did, is I put the egg whites in. And then I use my spatula. Let me get that off and see if I can get all of it. I try and get every bit of it. I don't want to leave that goodness behind because I want to have that airiness and a nice light cake. So I try and get all of the egg whites off of that. Okay, that looks pretty clean. All right, so then I take this and I usually hand fold a little bit. To kind of get the egg whites down in there some. Because this is what gives your cake the lightness. And you definitely want the lightness in the cake because that's what makes it so good. And this is a very moist cake. You wouldn't think it'd be so moist, but it's very moist. All right, so once I've kind of got it, used the spatula a few times to turn it in, then I run it on low for about 10 or 15 seconds before I put it on high for the 1 minute that the recipe called for. So I'm gonna put it on the lowest setting. And I'm gonna set my kitchen timer while it's on the lowest setting for 1 minute. All right, that's enough that everything looks pretty incorporated, so I'm turning it up to high, switching stop. "25 seconds to go." This is pretty boring watching a mixer. So if you want to fast forward 25 seconds or 10, 15 seconds, I don't blame you. Okay, so that my timer just went off, so I'm turning that and I'm getting my spatula out of the other bowl. And we're gonna clean this off and get all that goodness of the cake batter down in the cake. Okay. All right, so everything, we get that off, get that off. So I try and keep as much of the cake batter in the cake so I don't have a big waste. Put that in that other bowl that needs to be washed. And now we're just going to divide the batter between our two pans that we already have ready. And I heard the oven make the sound that says it's to temperature. So that's good. The oven is hot. Even though I was a little late turning it on, it's hot enough. Okay, so that is one half, that's the other half. And I remember sitting in the little stool watching the second hand for my grandmother. That was my job when she would be making my brother Jeff's birthday cake. He always asked for a caramel cake and she would make him a caramel cake. And he and Ed were talking about that they were outside sweating because I always had allergies growing up and doing yard work, and even Mom was out doing yard work, but I'd be inside with Gian and we'd be doing things like making this caramel cake. Anyway, that's what we did. So I take my knife and I kind of want to spread my batter out to the corners. And then I go back and forth like this and like this to remove any air bubbles and get it nice and pretty level. Do the same thing with this one. Spread my batter out to the corners. Whoops. Well, I'm just making a grand mess there. Now I got cake batter on my mixer. That'll be all right. I'll wipe it off after I turn the camera off. All right, so that's, and then we do the same thing with the knife. This takes out the big air bubbles. Get that off with the knife. Okay. I also do this. That gets things nice and level. We put them in the oven. I have not run a timer on this on all the years I've made this cake. The directions say remove from the oven when the straw comes out clean, and I think it would probably be about 20-25 minutes though, and I bake it at 315, depending on how your oven, or if you're using, like I'm using black pans, and black pans you usually set the temperature a little lower than you do for silvery pans, or in glass pans there's even a different temperature, but I don't have glass pans, so I don't know what the temperature should be for those. So we're going to pause the video right there, and when it comes out of the oven, I will have part 2. All right, we'll see you then. Bye.